As I mentioned at the beginning of yesterday's program, there are a lot of conspiracy theorists out there who are peddling these wild stories out of North Carolina, and they're simply not true. But the left is also denying things that are true. For example, FEMA says it has the money right now to help in North Carolina, but FEMA says it's going to run out of money by the end of the year and won't be able to help the rest of the hurricane season. And FEMA is essentially using dead bodies in North Carolina as a way to guilt the government into giving FEMA more money. And a story came out that FEMA had spent a lot of its money on illegal aliens. Turns out Customs and Border Patrol was ordered to reallocate a bunch of money to FEMA, and that's part of the money that FEMA spent. But this is the headline from Politico on June 7th, 2023. The headline is New York City to get $104.6 million from FEMA for asylum seekers. That's right, from FEMA. The pot of money is the second from the Federal Emergency Management Agency and sharply contradicts expectations from top officials in the administration of New York City Mayor Erick about how much money the city would be receiving. In early May, the Department of Homeland Security, which includes FEMA, announced a $332.5 million allocation that largely went to communities along the southern border. New York City received about $30 million, which drew outrage from the city. The city's allocation through the new federal shelter and services program constitutes around 30% of the money announced Wednesday and is larger than payments to other cities. The FEMA funds were negotiated as part of the budget, according to Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. So they are getting money from FEMA. That's the story last year. And now suddenly members of the media are like, no, they're not. No, they're not. They are. FEMA is an organization that is probably corrupt, definitely incompetent. There are good people who work there, and they mean well, but the Washington bureaucracy across the board is in poor shape. We do not have competent people. My daughter the other day, I've told you these ongoing stories, folks. My daughter the other day received in the mail a returned envelope that could not be delivered to the addressed party. The address was correct. The envelope was mailed months ago. When she mailed out her graduation invitations, people are still getting them in the mail. She graduated back in May. She mailed out the announcements in March. People are still getting them. The mail is an Article 1, Section 8 responsibility of the federal government. Disaster relief is not. A government that cannot handle the mail properly is not going to handle disaster relief properly. What a lot of you, I think, misunderstand, however, is that FEMA is not a first responder organization. Never has been a first responder organization. FEMA actually doesn't even begin to act until state governments request it and then further federal authorizations. But what the media is missing is that it took Joe Biden 5 days to sign a disaster declaration for North Carolina. There's absolutely incompetence. And a lot of people interpret extreme incompetence as maliciousness, but it's not. The incompetence in part comes from the arrogance of these bodies. And they think they know what's best, and they hold a lot of people in contempt. And it's not genuinely maliciousness. It presents itself as maliciousness, but it's an arrogance combined with incompetence. And that's what's happening at the federal government in all aspects of it. And it really came to fruition when Barack Obama was president of the United States, who took an already left-leaning bureaucracy and made it comfortable in its left-leaningness. And now it's moved on with the Biden administration. And by the way, I had an elected statewide official confirm this for me last night on the phone, who said that FEMA is telling local governments it will make them whole. And local governments are trying to allocate for their budgets. And he said he was advising these local governments that don't count on the FEMA money. It could take 3 or 4 years to get to you. 3 or 4 years for FEMA to reimburse local governments is outrageous. And he said one of the reasons it's taking 3 or 4 years, and you can look in FEMA's guidelines, and I have, and it's true, they are prioritizing equity. And in prioritizing equity, they are first giving their money to underserved communities of color. So Chimney Rock, North Carolina, obliterated by this disaster, will come later than a non-white community that was not as affected, because it's in the name of equity. We got to give to the community that wasn't completely affected, but because it's majority black, it therefore is definitionally underserved according to FEMA, and we'll get to Chimney Rock, North Carolina in a decade or so. We don't need a conspiracy theory that the federal government is bulldozing Chimney Rock, leaving bodies in the street, and taking everybody's land. We don't need that conspiracy theory to make it bad enough. It's bad enough that FEMA is prioritizing equity in its allocations. There's actually a school in Chattanooga, Tennessee, that was destroyed by a tornado several years ago that FEMA was going to help, but they settled with their insurance company so that they could begin building, and FEMA got involved and is blocking the building effort because FEMA's got to figure out how much money to still give them. There are literally pallets of materials rotting, and have been for over a year, in a parking lot because FEMA is moving so slow in a tornado that took place several years ago. That should be scandal enough. It should be scandal enough that FEMA is prioritizing equity. But it's not a first responder. And FEMA will never do as much as the state government, will never do as much as the local government, will never do as much as private charity. Now, let me give you a real world example from this morning about what Pete Buttigieg has done, and there's actually a practical reason why. Pete Buttigieg has suspended the ability to land and take off the Asheville airport. I made some phone calls on this, and here's what I can tell you. The reason is because the airport is overwhelmed. So many generous people are trying to fly in supplies. Air traffic control is overwhelmed. They don't have enough landing. They don't have enough number of landing rights and takeoff rights to handle all the traffic that's trying to come in. So they've had to restrict it. You've got to get prior approval. A friend of mine texted me this morning and said, I've got a pilot. He has a plane. It is loaded with supplies from churches in Florida to go to North Carolina, and they're being denied permission to land. They've got to have prior authorization. Can you help? Do you know anyone? I texted a buddy of mine who's a member of Congress. He texted me back right away and said, this is the lady they need to call. Call her right now. She'll give him permission. The plane is already in the air. And the lady explained to them that this has become necessary because they have too many planes. They can't land them all. They can't all take off. The skies are so crowded that they have legitimate safety concerns. This is separate from the helicopter issue. This is the landing and takeoff rights at the airport and the number of available times of day for people to come. It's overwhelmed. They've had to do it. It's not a conspiracy. It's of necessity. There are so many planes. They don't have space on the ground to have all the planes at the airport at one time. So they're having to have someone coordinate and say, okay, you land this time, you land this time. It's going to take you 4 hours to fly here. We'll have a runway spot clear for you to be able to land. That's all that's happening. And it's one lady who's handling the entire situation. I got her cell phone number. They called her. The plane's in the air. She had space. But in all of this, there are a couple of points that have to be made. One, we should expect competence from the government. We spend our tax dollars. It goes to a group like FEMA. We should want FEMA to be competent, and we should want FEMA to respond in a timely manner. Two, we should not want a federal government that screwed up COVID and everything else it touches, including mail delivery service, to try to be the first responder in a disaster. We can be outraged at the government incompetence, and as conservatives want less of it, but also recognize that our taxpayer dollars are going to it. Therefore, it should be operating in a competent way that does not priority BS stuff like equity, as opposed to this town got wiped off the map. We must prioritize its recovery first. But there's something else that must be said. The government is not going to save you. Do not look for the government to save you. Do not be outraged that the government is not saving people in North Carolina. If you call 911 because someone's kicking in your door, you're going to save yourself before the government shows up. When the storm comes, you're going to save yourself before the government. Your local community is going to save you before the government. Your friends are going to save you before the government. You know who was on the ground while the floodwaters were still raging? The Southern Baptist Convention. Its disaster relief program is better than anybody else's in the country. They were literally on the ground as the storm was raging in North Carolina, already beginning the recovery effort. The Mormons came closely after them. Walmart has showed up. The private sector and nonprofits have gotten there quicker, and they're going to handle it. And the question is not whether or not, when the government says private responses need to cease and allow the government to rise, the question is not that. The question is, what are you, the private citizen charity, going to do when government tells you that? Because the government is your government. You don't belong to the government, even though that's what the Democrats believe. The government belongs to you. And if the government is impeding recovery, you have the ability to go beyond that government entity that is blocking you from recovery, because the government works for you. You don't work for the government. Private charity and neighbor helping neighbor is going to save lives in North Carolina. The federal government is not. The federal government is a bunch of clowns that want you dependent on the federal government, and they're run by a dementia patient who doesn't even know whether he's living or dead. You're going to save yourself. FEMA's always going to be a mess. Should it be cleaned up? Yes, it needs to be cleaned up. Your distrust of government, though, is being manipulated by people lying to you. You want to hate the Democrats. They're giving you lots of stuff on social media to hate the Democrats with, and half of it isn't true. They're preying on you, and many people are allowing them to be preyed upon. I wrote this in my morning email. I hope you might get it and read it. In his pamphlet, A Simple Way to Pray, Martin Luther said of the line, "Give us this day our daily bread," in the Lord's Prayer, that we should reflect on praying in part this: grant to every estate townsman or farmer to be diligent and to display charity and loyalty toward each other. When we pray, "Give us this day our daily bread," we pray to God. He doesn't hand it to us directly, but from the farmer who grows the wheat, the harvester who harvests the wheat, the petrol man who makes the gas to fuel the combine and the truck to get it to market along with the truck driver, the grocer who sells it, the relief operator who buys it, who delivers it to the mountains to those in need. It's the body of Christ working and the people in communities working who are going to provide relief and rescue. It is not the government. The government is not going to save you. FEMA was not designed to save you. We're going to save each other. We don't need the conspiracy theories in North Carolina to be exaggerated. It's bad enough as it is. Government incompetence is on full display. People are interpreting the arrogance and incompetence as maliciousness, and I understand it, but it is not maliciousness. It is arrogance and incompetence. But beyond all that, your focus there on that distraction is distracting you from the people of North Carolina, the states around North Carolina, the people around the state of North Carolina have all come together to rescue people, recover bodies, and rebuild. The government of the United States is not going to save you or me. The people of the United States are. It is as true today as it always has been. Americans, led by the Southern Baptists, and by the way, I'm not just saying that, it's actually true. They're the first ones in. They'll be the last ones out. And 10 years from now, FEMA will start writing checks. That in and of itself is an outrage, and that needs to be fixed. But don't be so focused on what FEMA is or is not doing to distract you from the fact that Americans have mobilized to help save people in North Carolina, and they will not let bureaucrats stand in the way. And that's a good thing. That is the American spirit we need to remember. It is an open line Friday, and Jeremy, let me go to you. Welcome.
Eric, I'm a general contractor and builder. I deal with the government every day in building regulations, permits, zonings, you name it. I have to deal with the government. And you hit the nail on the head. The government works for us. We don't work for the government. However, that is not the sentiment in any local government anywhere anymore. It's not just the federal bureaucracy. It is a disease within even the local governments. Every once in a while you get to a local government that you feel like works for you. And I recently there's a local government I've been dealing with, and I asked the city manager, I said, how come you are so easy to deal with, unlike 95% of the other government agencies across this state that I deal with getting permits? And he said, well, we're in the utility business. They supply their own electricity, natural gas, and internet in this city, this Georgia city. And he says we've modeled our whole government after our utility business to be a service of the people, and I think it makes a difference. And he was
Amen.
100% right. The difference between that city and another city I'm getting a permit or dealing with a zoning 20 miles up the road is night and day difference. And I don't know where you start to get
It's honestly,
the government works for us.
It's got to be a culture of the elected officials instilling it on the bureaucrats, because the bureaucrats have got to understand that they fundamentally, they are our employees. We're not theirs. You got to do that. Thanks very much for the phone call.
The Biden administration is trying to do through HUD actually is through grants and regulatory rewrite. They can't impose local zoning regulations. What they can do, however, is they can say, if you want money, you have to do these things. And they are absolutely trying to force some local governments into rezoning. And, you know, ironically, one of the issues here is gentrification. It's become all the rage among progressives these days. Now, what is gentrification? That is when you take a poor community and people of higher income start moving in because housing's cheap. They start fixing up the houses in the neighborhood, so the neighborhood starts to broaden the tax base. The homes go up in value, generates more property taxes. Well, when all the homes around you get more valuable, even if you haven't done anything to yours is going to get more valuable because of location. So then you can't afford to live there anymore and you push out. And the Biden administration is actually trying to push back on gentrification. And by the way, it's mostly white progressives in urban areas who are causing it. And essentially, it's to keep tax bases low, but also, ironically, it's to keep poor people from even being able to fix up their houses in their communities. It's one of the wildest, least covered stories happening right now, is in order to push back on the gentrification in neighborhoods of white people moving into communities, the Biden administration is incentivizing local governments to ensure that the slum stays the slum. It's wild. It's their response to white progressives gentrifying areas. Now, I want to move to a story that it warms my heart to see this happening. It is this. Democrats fear how quickly the Wisconsin Senate race is tightening. Party insiders are worried Tammy Baldwin could lose. Tammy Baldwin, her lead in both public and internal polling has deteriorated, and Republicans are beginning to outspin the Democrats. Baldwin leads by just 2 points in internal Democratic polling. A source familiar with the campaign told Axios it's much closer than what public polling has shown for months. Democrats are on pace to be outspent by Republicans in the state every week until Election Day, with an infusion of around $20 million from Republican sources. Now, that would doom the Democrats in the Senate. Part of this is a fundraising plea, Democrats using the press to beg for money, but they have to beg for money because Baldwin's not doing well. One of the reasons Baldwin's not doing well is something I was the first person to call national attention to, and I got attacked for calling attention to it, but it's had a big impact there. Tammy Baldwin is a lesbian. She was one of the first, I think is the only lesbian in the United States. There was the first. She is in a relationship with a woman named Maria Brisbane. Maria Brisbane is a private wealth manager from New York City. Now, nothing wrong with that in politics. What's wrong is that Baldwin and Brisbane have not gotten married, even though they consider themselves quote-unquote life partners. So Baldwin has not disclosed the financial aspects of their relationship because she says they're not married, so the rules don't apply to her. But there have been credible allegations that Tammy Baldwin has, in her position in the United States Senate, helped to benefit the investments of her life partner through Tammy Baldwin's service in the United States Senate. There are all sorts of deeply troubling ethical issues about Tammy Baldwin's conduct in the United States Senate with her life partner because they are not married. And so Tammy Baldwin says, I don't have to disclose any of this stuff. I don't have to disclose it. And what we know is that at least on a couple of cases, Tammy Baldwin has in the Senate advanced the interests of companies that there are credible allegations that her life partner has investments with. It would be unethical and violate the rules of the Senate, except Baldwin says, there's nothing to see here because we're not married. They live together. They co-own a home or penthouse suite, something in Washington, D.C., They are the life partners. Now there's a story, and progressives are starting to pick this up as well. This is from a political website in Wisconsin. Senator Baldwin's partner, Maria Brisbane, advises the uber wealthy on industries regulated by Senator Baldwin, creating a massive conflict of interest. Senator Baldwin should disclose her partner's assets and client lists. The New York Post reported on the appearance of significant conflicts of interest that could arise from Baldwin and Brisbane's relationship. They have a $1.3 million D.C. home they purchased together. Senator Baldwin is the chair of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Labor, Health, Human Services, and Education and related agencies, and Brisbane's practice of investing her ultra-rich clients' money in industries that happen to be regulated through that subcommittee. And Baldwin has provided no transparency whatsoever on that relationship and on those investments and the entangling world of it. It should be deeply bothersome. What's so interesting is that what she pushes back on and says Baldwin is advocating legislation that would target conflicts of interest between the financial sector and those they regulate, including a cooling off period prohibiting former government employees from lobbying for 2 years. The bill is aimed at the executive branch, though, not the Congress. So Baldwin's out there saying, no, I favor transparency. Look, I've written legislation that would require transparency, except it exempts members of Congress. And Baldwin has refused to support an effort to amend congressional ethics legislation that would require disclosure of unmarried partnership relationships. She doesn't want to do that. She wants to keep it all private. And good for the Hovde team in Wisconsin for pointing this out, and it's having an impact on the voters. Now, there's a corollary here that I need to tell you on the bad news side of this for Republicans. It looks like, Hovde is surging in Wisconsin. McCormick is beginning to surge in Pennsylvania. That's a good sign. It looks like Tester is out in Montana, and it looks like Sherrod Brown is out in Ohio. It really does look like Bernie Moreno could win Ohio. But now let me give you the houses. The 1st Congressional District in Iowa has gone from lean Republican to toss-up. The 3rd Congressional District in Iowa has gone from lean Republican to toss-up. The Illinois 17 Congressional District has gone from lean Democrat to likely Democrat. That's an improvement for the Democrats. Indiana's 1st Congressional District has gone from lean Democrat to likely Democrat. That's an improvement for them. Montana's 1st Congressional District has gone from likely Republican to lean Republican. That's actually a decrease for the GOP. Everywhere there are Republicans, the House outlook is turning grim, and everywhere there are House Democrats, the outlook is turning good. It is looking more and more likely House Republicans could lose the United States House of Representatives, even as the Senate is held by Republicans. Now, in fairness, we need the GOP to take the Senate. We need the GOP to take the Senate because we got to stop the Democrats from killing the filibuster and packing the Supreme Court. It's very important. I'm hoping and presuming that it happens. However, if the Republicans get the Senate and they don't get the House, the Trump tax cuts expire next year and everybody's taxes are going up. The Democrats will say they didn't raise taxes on the middle class, but the middle class taxes will go up because the Trump tax cuts expire. So if Republicans lose the House and gain the Senate, well, we're all screwed on taxes anyway. They got to win everything. They got to win the House, the Senate, and the White House in order to keep taxes from going up. Taxes aren't going to go down, although the capital gains tax might, which would boost some investment in the economy. Donald Trump wants it to go down to 15%. But taxes are probably going to go up. And they're probably going to go up at a time of economic turmoil in this country. But the Senate is important, and right now it looks like if the election were held today, Republicans, they're going to win West Virginia, which gives a 50-50 Senate. So you need the vice president as the tiebreaker. But it looks like they're going to win Montana, which gets them 51. It looks more and more like they could win Ohio, which gets them 52. And then it looks more and more like between Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, there's hope they could get to 53. Maybe they can pull off Maryland with Larry Hogan. I'm not sure. They're going to lose Arizona, a state they could be winning. Trump's going to win Arizona, and Kari Lake's going to be losing Arizona. And the moral of the story between the House races and that race in Arizona for Kari Lake is that candidate quality still matters. And so many people have wanted candidates who Donald Trump has laid hands on or who have made obscene spectacles of themselves humping his leg. Those people won the primaries, and they've been terrible general election candidates. We saw this with Herschel Walker. We saw it with Dr. Oz. We saw it with Kari Lake and Blake Masters the last time. Now we're going to see it with Kari Lake a second time. Candidate quality matters, and the Republicans in the Senate did a very good job recruiting very good candidates, and it looks like they're going to win. House Republicans did not do a very good job of recruiting people, and too many of Donald Trump's supporters wanted the people most loyal to Donald Trump, not the most likely to win. And that's going to cost the GOP some seats in the House. And then taxes will go up. With taxes going up, the economy, regulations, everything else, all the interest rate hikes. Well, Swiss America has been the trusted leader in precious metals for 40 years, and they've been warning people about a secret war in cash. If you've been interested in safeguarding your hard-earned cash from the secret war, you need to get their free report about the secret war on cash. They're rated A+ by the Better Business Bureau. Swiss America can educate you on protecting your assets in this report. It takes less than 15 minutes to read. It is completely free. All you have to do to get your copy is call or text my name, Erick, E-R-I-C-K. Call them, mention my name, Erick, or just text my name to this number, 800-289-2646. All War on Cash includes digital forms of currency. The government is tracking how you spend your money, whether you believe it or not. They are. The report, Secret War on Cash, you can get it for free. Swiss American can educate you on this. Just mention Erick when you call or text 800-289-2646. You can also go to SwissAmerica.com/Erick or call or text my name to 800-289-2646. 800-289-2646. Message and data rates apply. As always, if you will text Erick, E-R-I-C-K, to 33777. Click that first link. You can get the show notes. And I hope you will actually read today's morning piece that the government will not save you, because I think we need to be reminded of that, FEMA is not a first responder agency. And a lot of people are complaining about its slow response. It's not a first responder. Is it incompetent? Yes. Is it arrogant? Yes. Is it a first responder? No. Also, I want to nip something in the bud real quick. A lot of DeSantis supporters believe that because Ron DeSantis took the National Guard and put them in charge of Florida ports, that forced the dock workers to settle their strike. I hate to burst your bubble, but no, that had nothing to do with it. If anything, the dock workers would have been fine watching the National Guard try to unload the ships and pointed to anything that went wrong to prove that they couldn't do what the dock workers did. Now, I know if you're in the cult personality of DeSantis, I can't dissuade you from it, even if you're wrong, and you are wrong. It's not an if, you actually are wrong. The reason I actually know you're wrong is because I'm in a group chat with one of the guys who's a lawyer for the docks, for the ports. And I was in this group chat yesterday morning saying it looked like they were on the verge of settlement, and it was before the DeSantis stuff even came out that he was going to put the National Guard in charge. The reason is twofold. One, the salary demand was way more important than the automation demand, and also they realized it was going to be terrible PR for them if they kept this thing closed and it started impeding recovery efforts for North Carolina. So they basically kicked the strike until January. There are all sorts of conspiracy theories about, well, the head of the union endorsed Kamala Harris. They think Trump's going to get elected. They're going to sabotage him. This is really more about money than automation, although the head of the union actually supports getting rid of automated tolls and wants to go back to having toll booths with toll operators. That's right. That's right. You know how you have your quick pass? Like I've got a little RFID or whatever chip with a barcode on my car. So when I get on the toll lane in Georgia, I just zip right through. There is no toll booth. To ride that toll lane in Georgia, you have to have that little barcode. There are no toll operators. He wants to get rid of those little barcodes and chip readers and go back to toll booths with human beings who collect money. It is a Luddite operation masquerading on principle. It's just absolutely bizarre. But no, DeSantis had nothing to do with incentivizing the windup of that strike early. I hate that so many people have now so rushed into cults of personality. They've turned politics into cults of personality, and he's my guy, and he did this thing, and therefore everything in the world revolves around him doing this thing. I like Ron DeSantis tremendously. I think the world of his staff. He's got some of the best staff out there. But no, this had nothing to do with him. And if you believe it has anything to do with Ron DeSantis, I want you to hear me from the bottom of my heart. Not only are you wrong, but you're worshiping at an idol's altar. You're not worshiping God. You are worshiping an idol. If everything goes back to your politician has done something, therefore this thing happened because of him, you are idol worshiping and you've turned him into an idol, and he will disappoint you one day. God is going to smash your idol, so please stop thinking like that. I was listening to a Tim Keller sermon yesterday, as a matter of fact. Man, y'all, I just had this moment. It's now happened to me twice where I've heard him say something and texted him and just, oh, you're not there to respond to my text. He's dead. But what he was saying is there's this podcast series called Gospel in Life. Keller's sermons go from 1997 basically to 2017, and they just are recycling these, and they're on Ephesians right now. And he was talking about what Paul is saying in, I think it's Ephesians 4, is essentially that your life is theological. You can't navigate life without a theological worldview. And if you do try to navigate life without a theological worldview, then your idolatry will show itself. So when you don't look at things and think God is sovereign, God's in control, how do I navigate my life through worshiping God? How do I honor God? By giving it my all at my job, by giving it my all at how I raise my kids, by giving it my all in how I conduct myself in my marriage and with my friends and around. If your worldview is not theologically based on how am I going to honor God in everything I do, your life is going to be idolatry based. How do I honor and worship my idols in what I do? And that then turns people into political animals or hedonists or you name it. So please stop just thinking this guy that I love in politics did this, therefore this other thing must be related to that, because that's idol talk. Not IDLE, but IDOL talk. And just stop it. It's not good for you. Now, let's move on to other things. I want to move on to the economy, because the economy matters. It's the economy, stupid, James Carville said. There's actually today some good economic news out there, and we shouldn't shy away from good economic news. Non-farm payroll surged by 254,000 in September, up from a revised 159,000 in August, and better than the 150,000 the Dow Jones Industrial forecasted. Now, this could be revised down, but this is important. They had revised a number from August down to 159,000. They say this is 254,000. We should wait for the revision to see, considering how they revised the jobs down 1 million last time. The unemployment rate fell to 4.1%, down 0.1%. The household employment showed a gain of 430,000 people employed. Average hourly earnings increased 0.4 on the month, and we're up 4% for the year. Those are actually really good. So now the way wage growth is working is it's starting now to get ahead of the inflationary concerns. Your wages are starting to go back up. Now they're still down. They're still down given inflation was so high, but they're starting to outpace inflation, which is a good thing. Those numbers are all very good. Those numbers probably are going to be revised because that is what the government does these days. They trot out these fantastic numbers and then they walk them back. The private sector data, though, does suggest wages are up and right now outpacing monthly inflation numbers. The private sector data does show hiring, so we can exclude the government to that. But here are some warnings. Americans are running out of unemployment benefits and part-time jobs are at record levels, pointing to a recession. A lot of the full-time jobs, the government is saying, people are having full-time jobs. You got to remember, when Obama was president after the 2008 financial crisis, they revised how we count jobs in this country. So people who are working 2 part-time jobs that get them 39 and a half hours a week, not 40, but 39 and a half hours a week, are now considered to be working full-time. If people are working 3 part-time jobs that get them to 39 and a half hours a week, they're working full-time. So full-time employment may be up, but it may be because people are working multiple jobs. That part-time jobs are at a record level is a big indicator that that's actually what's going on. 21% of workers are now taking more than 27 weeks to find a new job. That's an increase of 3% according to Business Insider. So it takes 21% of workers, almost a quarter of the workforce, looking for jobs. It's taken 27 weeks. It was for a time very easy to hop from one job to another. It's now taking people far longer to find employment to replace their current job. Side note, if it is taking you longer to find a new job, if it's taking more than 27 weeks to find a new job, Philip and Charlie, you better be on your A game. Because if I fire you again, it's going to take you 27 weeks to find a new job, and your wives and children who depend on you will not like it. So straighten up, be on your A game, and don't make me fire you again. Just need that in the record there. 27 weeks to find a new job. It's a long time. Jeff's going to be furious with you. Jen is going to throw you out of the house, Charlie. I'm just saying, be careful there. Don't make me mad. Now, related to all of these things. Okay, Philip threw my wife in my face that she won't let it happen. He's probably right, but we won't talk about that. She likes them more than me. Now, related to this, I cannot believe my employees both threw my wife in my face. She won't let you fire us. It's my job. It is my company. I am the chief executive officer. My wife, she gets half if we get divorced, but she doesn't get a title in the company. I need that for the record. Now, I move on. Obnoxious employees. JetBlue and Spirit. They come into this picture. The Department of Justice has become very hostile, as the Biden administration has as a whole, to mergers. Now, why do companies merge? They believe, yes, generally good for shareholders. Absolutely true. Good for shareholders. Values improve, but also economies of scale. It is very difficult to make an airliner profitable. George Will had a very famous line a number of years ago, shortly after 9/11 and all the government subsidies for airlines after they shut them out of the sky, that from the time Wilbur and Orville took off from Kitty Hawk until those planes flew into the World Trade Center on 9/11, the total aggregate profit of the American airline industry was about 5 cents. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not much of an exaggeration. The airline industry is notoriously unprofitable. Just think about it. You are getting these two aluminum or composite tubes filled with kerosene and people into the air and back safely on the ground, and all the luggage and everything else, and there's only so much you can charge because people only have so much money. It is an expensive endeavor. I don't buy stock in airline companies, even as I love Delta. I love Delta. Someone tell Ed I'm talking about Delta again, because I do love. I try my hardest to ever avoid flying American Airlines. I do not like American. I'll fly United if I have to. But look, I'm in Atlanta. I like Delta. I'm not a big Southwest has this massive cult following of people. They're all from Texas. I've never been, when it was AirTran, look, I'd fly AirTran. Why? Because they had first class. And you could upgrade really cheap if you showed up at the gate and you wanted to pay like $25 extra and there was room, you could get into first class. This whole Southwest, I mean, it's like sitting with green chat bubbles. Why? But nonetheless, it's not a profitable endeavor. So JetBlue and Spirit were going to merge. Economies of scale, efficiencies, expanded routes. You're buying the fuel in bulk. It brings down the overall price. And the Biden administration said, no, sirree, Bob, you cannot merge. It would restrict consumer options. If you were to merge, you could drive up prices and restrict the options of consumers. You know what else restricts the options of consumers and drives up prices? Bankruptcy. Spirit Airlines, according to the Wall Street Journal, exploring bankruptcy, possible restructuring, because since they were not allowed to merge with JetBlue, they have financial difficulties. The market value of Spirit Airlines has plunged. They've struggled with losses and declining revenue. You can only run a budget airline at a certain low budget, and they have low budgeted it as much as they possibly can, and they can't make ends meet. They weren't allowed to merge, so they're going to go out of business, if not restructure, and people are going to go unemployed, all because the Biden administration decided that the government bureaucrats knew better than the people in the private sector what to do. A reminder, it's not maliciousness. It's interpreted as maliciousness. It's arrogance plus incompetence equals the government, which equals the appearance of maliciousness. It's not malicious. They're just too arrogant to realize they're too stupid to second guess the aviation industry. They've done it, and now people are going to lose their jobs. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here across the nation. Let me just play you a portion of this clip real quick. Debuted on Morning Joe, I guess. It's got all the media in a tizzy. Just listen to a minute.
Hi, I'm Bruce Springsteen. Friends, fans, and the press have asked me who I'm supporting in this most important of elections. And with full knowledge that my opinions no more or less important than those of any of my fellow citizens, here's my answer. I'm supporting Kamala Harris for president and Tim Walz for vice president, and opposing Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Here's why. We are shortly coming upon one of the most consequential elections in our nation's history. Perhaps not since the Civil War has this great country felt as politically, spiritually, and emotionally divided as it does then at this moment. It doesn't have to be this way.
First of all, so they get Megan Rapinoe to dress up in a flannel shirt and go to a diner and pretend to be Bruce Springsteen. And we're supposed to care what Bruce Springsteen thinks. An exceedingly wealthy man who we already know is a Democrat, we already know is not going to support Donald Trump, but he wears his flannel so he can be man of the people, goes to a diner to be man of the people, away from his very expensive home and security detail and private plane, so that he can tell you as a pretend man of the people that he's going to vote for the people we already knew he was going to vote for, and the media thinks it's just the biggest news of the day. Who cares? My buddy Scott Jennings, God bless Scott, he was on CNN, and responded to this.
Concerts in Pennsylvania. He's not like some out of touch LA celebrity.
I don't care.
Right? Fair?
I legitimately don't care because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris ran the country into the ground. I want directionally a center-right government, and I don't give a crap what some celebrity thinks about it who's got hundreds of millions of dollars. He's not affected by their policies.
You care what Hulk
But
Hogan
working
thinks.
people in Kentucky do care about it, and that's where I live, and that's who I
I
represent.
agree with
Amen. I don't care about Hulk Hogan. Y'all, I do not care about celebrity endorsements. I simply do not care about a celebrity endorsement. I don't care about Chris Rock. I don't care about Hulk Hogan. I don't care about Russell Brand. I don't care about Taylor Swift. I don't care about George Clooney. I don't care about Bruce Springsteen. I just simply, I don't care. But there's a tie in here. And it is that a lot of people do. Let's go back to the Ron DeSantis dock worker thing. DeSantis deserves a lot of praise for sending the National Guard out to take over the docks and run the ports with the strike. Good for him. That was real leadership, to find a way around a strike that could negatively impact a relief effort. But some DeSantis supporters decided to say, but that means that DeSantis is the reason for the dock workers calling off the strike. They've confused correlation and causation because they are worshiping political idols and their worldview is political. So 95, 98, 99% of America did not hear that DeSantis was doing this in Florida, and then hear that a strike that affects every port in the United States east of the Mississippi, east of the Rockies, that somehow that all the strikes at all those ports went away because of Ron DeSantis. But Ron DeSantis hardcore supporters did because of their idol worship. The media plays up the celebrity endorsements of Taylor Swift and Bruce Springsteen and Beyonce. Remember all the excitement that she was going to be the special guest? The Democrats played it all up. Rumor was there was going to be this big special guest. They presumed it had to be Beyonce. Everybody on CNN was so excited that they just couldn't wait. MSNBC was twittering there was no special guest at all. They all thought it was Beyonce until Beyonce's agent released a statement, says not going to be her. They're like, who's it going to be? It's got to be a big celebrity. Remember, and it was the members of the media that were playing this up. The members of the media were so excited. It's going to be a cool celebrity because they're worshiping idols. The cult of celebrity. We have so many worldviews today that involve pleasure and celebrity. In fact, there's a Newsbusters highlighted this. The CBS this morning doing a series on religion. You know who they decide to interview rather? A trans man, which means a woman, who is a Lutheran pastor. Side note. Yesterday, I did an event for my buddy David Nicholas, handles some of my financial accounts, and I do ads for him as my financial advisor on my flagship station, WSB. And so I did an event for David with new clients who were talking about politics and stuff, and religion came up, and I went on a soapbox about something. But I was laughing about Tim Walz being identifies as Lutheran, not as a Christian, but as a Lutheran. Yesterday, it was a very funny line. I have to give it to him. It's very typically Lutheran. They're in the Evangelical Lutheran Church, which is pretty progressive. The Missouri Synod is conservative. The Evangelical Lutheran Church is very liberal, gay marriage, stuff like that these days. And that's the ELC one is therein. So a reporter yells at Tim Walz. He and his wife are in the line at a restaurant, like a self-serve buffet-style restaurant. Say, will you tell us more about your religion? And Walz, without missing a beat, says, my wife and I are Lutherans, so we don't talk about religion. It was actually, it made me laugh. It was a very good line. This is a Lutheran minister. Listen to this on CBS This Morning.
There are a lot of people who say that, according to the Bible, God made man and woman, and that couldn't be more clearly defined. How do you respond to them?
It's hard to relate it to modern day times because it wasn't written for 2024, it was written for then. When we read in the scripture that God created man and woman, yes, and God created everyone else as well.
God created everyone else as well. No. Here's the thing everybody misses. There are things in Scripture that apply to specific churches or specific people or specific places, but the broad outline of Scripture, and for example, Genesis 1, applies to all of us. And we're supposed to conform to Scripture. Scripture's not to conform to us. I mean, take the role of men and women. This is one of the things I was trying to text Tim Keller about this morning in his sermon on marriage. And he actually does a very good job of embracing complementarianism, that men and women, they're not the same. And God says ultimately that man is supposed to be the head of the household. You may not like that, but there are reasons why God says that, and we're supposed to conform to that. And that doesn't mean that men get to be abusive and things like that. In fact, it's actually tells men you got to put your wife first and be sacrificial in your love to her. You got to lay down your life for your wife. She doesn't have to lay down her life for her. You got to lay down your life for your wife. But people want to conform themselves to the present as opposed to be bound by ancient words. People are trying to find their place. And one of the things that, whether it's the mental health discussion from the other day or what have you, people are trying to find themselves. And if they're not guided by their theology, they're going to create a theology. Now, I get told regularly by the program directors of America, don't get preachy, be careful of talking faith. Let me just, though, talk to you in some general parameters here. Every single person has a worldview. Let's just say that conservative Christians are right, or even if they're not. Let's say, because there's this big debate over Genesis. Did Moses write it, or was it written by Jews in exile? We know it's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Like, it predates Christ. Like, we know that the Jews went into exile. We know the history. We know they were in the Persian Empire. We know they began to return home. All of that happening BC, happened before the Roman Empire, happened before the birth of Christ. All of that. We know Genesis has been around for a long time. Progressives believe that Genesis was probably written over time and refined during the exilic period. Conservatives believe Moses wrote it. Either way, this stands out to me. Whether it was the Jews in exile or Moses, but I say Moses. This is a prince of Egypt who's writing, who grew up with the worldview of a polytheistic religion where Ra excretes, pleasures himself, and with the emissions there, all the stars in the sky are basically his, emissions, and they're all gods. Every star in the sky is a god. Everything is a god. And if you say, okay, no, actually this was the Persian Empire, well, the Persians were polytheistic as well. Persians had a pantheon of gods. And here's someone writing, actually, Moses, saying, actually, the stars in the sky are just objects. The moon and the sun, they're not to be worshipped. They're just objects in the sky. Thousands of years ago, when every religion on the planet believed that the sun and the moon were gods, as were the stars, the Jews were the only people on planet Earth at the time of any credibility or note. There were a few monotheists, but they were very rare, and they tended to belong to certain personality cults. And here come the Jews, not a personality cult, but a religion with an entire book of laws and stories. And they're like, no, those are objects of the sky. We're not supposed to worship them. There's just God. They had a theological worldview. Everybody had a theological worldview. You may be an atheist, but in your atheism, you have a theological worldview. Your atheism is you're anti-God, but you're not anti-theology. You have a theology, and the theology is you are your God. The world revolves around you in some capacity, and there is no afterlife in your worldview. You rot and the worms eat you, but it's still a theology. It's still a theologically based worldview. You may not like the terminology, but it is. And what we're seeing today is so many people have never had to push themselves and to try to figure out what their worldview is. And in fact, we have an entire culture that tells us, parents, don't give your children a worldview. They're supposed to find it for themselves. I don't want my child finding a worldview for themselves. I intend to impose my worldview on my children, and if they deviate from it when they're adults, that's fine. But I intend to bind them to my worldview as a child because it's called good parenting. Letting a 5-year-old decide he's going to decide whether he's a boy or a girl is child abuse as so much as it is as a parent imposing their screwed up worldview on the child. We've all got a worldview. And so many people are abandoning a God-centered worldview for a political-centered worldview. And that's actually causing a lot of the conversational discord we have in life today. I'll tell you a basic brazen fact. Said this last night, I've said it to y'all. I've had more than one serious, committed pro-life activist tell me that they would rather spend time with Nancy Pelosi in Washington, D.C. than many of the Republicans in Congress. The reason is because they know going into Nancy Pelosi's office that they disagree on everything about that issue, so they can find some common ground. With many of the Republicans, they go in and those Republicans pat them on the back, pat them on the head, tell them how much they love Jesus and babies and they're with them, and then they go on and fund Planned Parenthood. You know, going into Nancy Pelosi's office, she's going to fund Planned Parenthood. These Republicans lie to your face. I mean, as far as I can tell, half the South Carolina delegation commits itself to traditional marriage and yet are cheating on their wives. I mean, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? I mean, there are a great number of Republican members of Congress who claim to be committed to traditional values who can't keep their pants up because they themselves have embraced a worldview that is not the theological worldview they claim to subscribe to. It's one of idols, and their idols are, among other things, pleasure. And we as a people are headed in a direction where either we get our head right with our worldview or this cult of personality is only going to get worse. It's going to get back to the pre-pagan times where the Romans themselves were a cult of personality revolving around an emperor. You know why did you know the Romans believed the Christians were actually atheists? Because the Christians worshipped a living God and the Romans believed that you had to be dead to be a god. So the Roman cult of personality, once the emperor died, he became their god. And they said, you Christians, y'all are nuts. If your guy's alive, he can't be a god. Therefore, you're an atheist, and we're going to kill you. As much as the world changes, it stays the same. For those of you who do, some of you get very defensive. But the data, the underlying data of this election, doesn't matter which pollster you ask. Even the Republican pollsters find this. And when you take the averages, it works out pretty good. People, majority of Americans, don't like Donald Trump. And hate is not too strong a word there. They think he's unstable. They think he's impulsive. They think that their stress level goes up thinking about him being in charge, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time, they really don't like Kamala Harris. They don't like the way she got the nomination by shoving Joe Biden aside. They don't like the Biden-Harris economy. They think Kamala Harris has played a role. They don't like that she's been there 3.5 years and she's now telling them what she's going to do her first day in office because she's been there for 3.5 years. And I think there are a lot of people who say, look, I hate Donald Trump, but I liked the economy under Donald Trump. And I can turn off the TV when he comes on and still reap the benefits of his economy. And that's why I think when you look at the underlying data, who's going to fix the economy? Republicans lead. Who's going to fix immigration? Republicans lead. Government should do less. 55% of Americans say government should do less. All of these data points favor Donald Trump. And then there's this Rui Tierra. Rui Tierra is the pollster and strategist that Democrats pay attention to a lot. He writes a Substack called The Liberal Patriot. Let me read you some of this. Democrats are steadily losing ground with Hispanic voters. The seriousness of this problem tends to be understated in Democratic circles for several reasons. They don't realize how big the shift is. They don't realize how thoroughly it undermines the most influential Democratic theory of the case for building their coalition, and they believe that any Hispanic flirtation with the GOP is temporary. They'll come back home. On the second point, consider that most Democrats like to believe that since a relatively conservative white population is in sharp decline, while a presumably liberal non-white population keeps growing, the course of social and demographic change should deliver an ever-growing Democratic population or coalition. It's simply a matter of getting this burgeoning non-white population to the polls. But consider this from the census. The biggest single driver for the increased non-white population is the growth of the Hispanic population. They are the largest group within the census designated non-white population, 19% Hispanic, 12% Black. While the representation among voters considerably lags their representation of the population, it's fair to say that voting trends among this group will decisively shape voting trends among non-whites in the future, since the share of votes will continue to increase, while Black voting share is expected to remain the same. It therefore follows that if Hispanic voting trends continue to move against the Democrats, the pro-democratic effect of non-white population growth will be blunted, if not canceled out entirely, and that very influential Democratic theory of the case falls apart. That could or should provoke a sea change in Democratic thinking. It's getting late enough in the cycle to venture an assessment of whether the rightward drift of Hispanics is continuing. For context, it's useful to review the 2020 election. According to Catalyst, in 2020, Latinos had an amazingly large 16-point shift towards Trump. Among Latinos, Cubans did have the largest shift towards Trump, 26%, but those of Mexican origin had a 12-point shift, and even Puerto Ricans moved by 18 points towards Trump. Latinos shifted towards Trump were widely dispersed geographically. Hispanic shifts towards Trump were not confined to Florida and Texas, but also states like Wisconsin, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Georgia. Those shifts were also concentrated among the working class Hispanics, non-college educated, which is the overwhelming majority of Hispanic voters. Catalyst data indicate that the decline in the Democratic margin among the working class Hispanic vote was 19 points compared to 9 points among college Hispanics. A strong working class Hispanic shift is consistent with detailed precinct level analyses in Hispanic neighborhoods released by the New York Times in 2020. And a just released analysis of precinct voting in Philadelphia by the Philadelphia Inquirer shows 75% net increase in the vote for Trump in working class Hispanic precincts between 2016 and 2020. The latest data indicates that the Democratic margin among Hispanics is continuing to fall. Cook Political Index maintains a database of crosstabs from high-quality surveys and finds the average margin for Harris among Hispanics to be 12 points, which is an 11-point drop from Biden's 23-point margin among them in 2020, which in turn was a 16-point drop from Clinton in 2016. Now, I don't have to continue on except this one point. The super high-quality New York Times Siena poll polled twice in September and found Harris leading by an average of 13 points among Hispanics across the two polls, implying a 10-point drop in Democratic support relative to 2020, which is consistent with all of the other data. So all of the other data points to a big decline in Hispanics. It's still a majority support for Hispanics towards the Democrats, but a massive, massive shift. So from Clinton to Biden, Hispanic support fell 16 points. From Biden to Harris now, it's another 11-point drop. That's pretty bad. And that's where we are. It is bad for the Democrats. It's really bad for Harris. By the way, it's not fantastic for mainline old school Republicans. It's great for the more populist Republicans. Because Hispanic voters are okay with the bigger social safety net and welfare programs, federal spending, but they're socially conservative. The drive for Hispanic voters has more to do with cultural issues than it does economic issues. They're fine with big government spending. They just really don't like progressivism, cultural progressivism. They don't like the trans rights stuff. They don't like the porn in elementary school stuff. They don't like the discussions of sexuality with their kids. They like homeschooling, all these sorts of things. The Democrats can't walk away from that stuff without alienating their donors, which, by the way, also gives Donald Trump a distinct advantage. Google does not get enough attention. Apple gets attention, Twitter gets attention, Meta gets a ton of attention. And the reason I think, and Patrick, I'll let you go there, the reason I think Meta gets a ton of attention is because Mark Zuckerberg has pretty much said, you know what, I am libertarian, I'm staying out of politics, and the left thinks they should own Meta. The left thinks they should control it. The reality is that the left does control Google, and Google, I personally think, is one of the companies that uses its algorithm to advance progressivism. And it's funny how often they get caught, and every time they say, oh, that was an accident, that was an accident. The accidents always go in one direction, towards hurting the right. Google's a malicious company, and I am totally fine with government breaking it apart. Totally fine with government breaking it apart. Google used to have its motto, don't be evil, which when you have to tell your employees don't be evil, it means that their default is to be evil or do no evil. Their propensity is to do evil. And I think that Google is a malicious actor. I don't think it's incompetence. They're too smart. I think they are malicious and trying to steer all of our information towards left-wing sources because they have decided the truth is left-wing, even though it's not. And I am deeply suspicious of Google. Now, I got to tell you about a group I'm not suspicious of, I'm a big fan of, is Americans for Prosperity, and they would love to have you on board with them. Americans for Prosperity is the largest and leading grassroots organization in the country. They've got chapters in almost every state. They would love for you to be a part. All you have to do is go to americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. You can put in your zip code, find out where your chapter is, and get started. If you want to go door knocking for common sense conservative solutions this November, they'll train you. If you want to talk to your local government about why charter schools or school choice are important or deregulation for small business is important, they'll give you all the information you need. If you want to go to your state legislature and advocate for school choice and common sense conservative solutions on crime and other issues, they will help you. All you have to do is go to americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. Let's say you don't want to go you don't want to go stand up in front of a bunch of people. That's okay. They'll give you all the information you need so you can be the influencer among your friends, steering them towards common sense conservative solutions. All you have to do is go to americansforprosperity.org/volunteer today. This hour of the program is brought to you by First Liberty Building and Loan. If you need a heavy equipment loan, if you're buying a building, if you are buying a franchise, reach out to the Frost family at First Liberty, firstlibertyga.com. They make their own lending decisions and see if they might be able to help your business, firstlibertyga.com. Melania Trump has come out with her memoir, and she has come out as stridently pro-abortion. Now, in fairness, to my knowledge, we have never had a pro-life First Lady of the United States. Rosalind Carter, Nancy Reagan, Barbara Bush, Hillary Clinton, Laura Bush, Michelle Obama, Jill Biden, and Melania Trump, they're all pro-abortion. And generally, husbands are rarely to the right of their wives on this issue. They may have to, for political expedience, be, but privately generally aligned with their wives. Melania Trump is now coming out pretty aggressively saying that she is not only pro-abortion, but she absolutely believes it's essential to support the right of women to be able to have an abortion if they so choose and control their bodies. This is, I'm sure, what she believes and has believed, but also timing is everything. It is not a coincidence in my mind that this is coming out. No, it's not, as some people said, oh, she really wants Trump to lose, that's why she's doing this. No. She wants to help Donald Trump with pro-choice voters. She wants to help Donald Trump. She wants to mitigate the abortion issue for the GOP. It's the same way that J.D. Vance is out there saying Donald Trump would absolutely veto a national abortion ban. This is a matter for the states. They're doing everything they can to reassure pro-abortion voters that there will be no abortion regulation from the federal government. Look, his wife is pro-abortion. This will cost Donald Trump nothing with pro-life voters, in the same way that Kamala Harris saying she is opposed to banning fracking will not cost her environmentalists, because the environmentalists and the pro-lifers understand what's at stake. Now, in fact, I will say, though, in a very close election, I actually think it's possible this could hurt Donald Trump with the hardcore pro-lifers, because the pro-life activists are the ones who are very upset about it. Pro-life activists are actually very loudly complaining that Melania Trump would do this, and given Donald Trump's statements on abortion in the last several months, a lot of pro-life activists have heartburn about having supported him. But the base of the party, not the hardcore activists inside the groups, but the ones who just care about the issue, they're not out there actually involved in the groups. They're not going to change. They're not going to stay home. They're going to go stop Kamala Harris. The Trump team understands pro-lifers are a cheap date in the same way that Kamala Harris understands that environmentalists are a cheap date. You know privately they're on your side, so you can say, or they can say or do whatever they want, and you're still going to go vote for them. You're never going to hold them accountable. They know it, and you know it. And to the extent that you're mad at me calling you a cheap date, it's because you know you are. It's just the truth of the matter. When we come back, we got to move on to other stuff, including the economy. There's actually some really good news about the economy today. Jobs, wages going up, unemployment falling again, people going back to work, but the underlying data actually suggests we're headed towards a recession. And Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are still so unpopular as an administration. People think the economy is still headed in the wrong direction, that these are just more warning signs for the Democrats. Harry Hinton on CNN again saying this is a big warning sign for Democrats and Kamala Harris in particular, that no president or administration has ever won re-election with people thinking the country is on the wrong track, as many people do now.